My name is Theo. I'm born and raised in New York City. Spent my childhood in East Village and grew up with this appreciation for working with my hands because of my parents, and my father being a carpenter, my mother being a painter, and all around it just sunk in when I was young and never really left. It's tough to estimate, but there are about 1,000 to 5,000 custom knife makers in America. Out of those, only about 350 people do it full time. It's a very specific trade that historically many people did, and then it dwindled as you were able to produce quality knives in a factory setting. And people kind of lost interest in this trade that honestly was, knives are part of our evolution. So when I was in high school, I was working at this art supply store, and there was this stainless steel ruler that it kind of looked like a sword to me. It was almost there. It had a bevel, it just needed a file and some sanding and just some elbow grease, and it could be a sword. Of course, after I did it, I had this sword-shaped object that didn't really work or act like a sword, and I had to figure out why, and after a little research discovered that I kind of started off on the wrong foot. You don't do gigantic pieces from the beginning, because you don't even really know what you're making. It's a tool, first and foremost, a knife. And a sword is something far beyond that. It's a weapon, it's a piece of art. It's not what I was prepared for. I feel like knives are part of what it is to be human. The knife was the first tool. It was the first thing we made with our hands. And it's been with us ever since. That really says something. It's part of our culture, part of who we are as a species.
Now we're just waiting for this bar to heat up. Given how thick it is and what it's made out of, we got to bring it up to about 2100 degrees to ensure that the layers forge well together and that the two bars of two very different metals forge well to each other as well. So what I'm looking for is that borax that I poured on it to start kind of bubbling, making the surface look like it's bubbling and a little bit glassy. The term for that, oddly enough, is kids at play, because it looks like a bunch of kids.
Let's just say, because there's so few people who do what I do, the calling is even more so. It's a lost art that's part of our evolution. And not an art only, a trade, a craft skill that allowed us to get this far. And the fact that there's so few of us now in comparison to 500 years ago, in comparison to just 100 years ago, it's almost a letdown that this historically important trade skill is dwindling.
All the blades that I don't end up selling or are too important to me to give away, I hold on to. These are many of my landmark pieces that have been certain progressions, stages, challenges that I've overcome. Like this dagger is my first successful hamon. This is one of my first successes at a satin finish for a larger piece. And this is see, and this is Sandmai Damascus, one of my first attempts at Sandmai Damascus. And I used this knife heavily for a long period of time, chopping wood, doing all sorts of woodcraft and leathercraft. It's held up to a lot. Goes to show, sometimes you find a perfect combination. Well, we're going to do a couple more passes to ensure that the weld sticks, and then I'm going to start shaping the blade. This is a somewhat small katana, large wakizashi. It's a commissioned piece, so I gotta forge it out to the length that they requested, and then make sure that the place where the two pieces meet does not shift.
So let's say someone wants a blade, something custom for them or a loved one that is just 100% that person, right? Let's say that person really loves dogs. Well, the very first thing we're going to do is figure out what that reference image is. What type of dog, for instance, right? I'm going to work off of that to start sketching and building the design, and it'll be a back and forth. I love to get customers involved in the process. I mean, of course, sometimes they say, do your thing. I don't have any specific requests, in which case I get a lot of fun. I get to have a lot of fun just pulling ideas out of my notebook and out of my collection of references and starting to work on those special to me blades that then I get to make and hand off so they're special to someone else as well. And then on very rare occasion, I will take the ashes of loved ones, and I can also forge weld them into the steel. And that presents problems unto itself, but ultimately then you have, for example, a kitchen knife where you're always cooking with that person. You know, my grandparents, I used some of their ashes to carburize some kitchen knives, which I gave out to my aunts and uncles. You know, it's funny, we joke about it, and it really is true. The secret to being a good blacksmith is practice. There's nothing else to it. You're gonna read a couple books, you're gonna watch a couple videos, but without practice and lots of it, you're never gonna get good. But that's like any other art form. That's like any other craft. I mean, this was a trade for the longest time. Now it's moved into the realm of art, but if you're a painter, you can do blacksmithing. It's nothing more sophisticated than the techniques that you've taught yourself or learned to handle that brush and be able to turn it at the exact amount as you're doing the stroke, right? That's very similar to how I have to place that hammer blow exactly on the spot that I'm trying to hit and move it as I hit it in the proper direction so that it moves that metal the way I want it to. I'd say paradise is that moment when you stick that cold piece of steel in the fire and you got the sketch of what you're going for, and you got a couple minutes while it heats up, and in those 10 minutes, that's paradise. The 10 minutes where you stare at the fire and go, okay, I'm going to start by pushing that steel in there, and then I'm going to draw out that steel over there, and you're just working out it in your head. You're no physical exertion at all. You're just looking at it, figuring it out. You're kind of letting the steel speak to you. It tells you what it wants to be. Paradise at home is when you return from the forge and you get that freshly finished knife and you just sit there and you're holding it and you're rotating it and you're feeling it out, and you've already done this at the shop. It's how you ended up with this knife. But now it's just a matter of really appreciating it and enjoying it. You know, you just got to sit there and look at it and go, all right, I did this really well. I could work on this for next time. My father's who I really got my appreciation of working with my hands. Art comes from the whole family, but being a craftsman, having a trade skill, that comes from my father. And seeing him holding one of my finished knives, turning it over, looking for that little smirk that tells me he thinks it's good, he likes it. I like that. That's what really matters. Because I've made a bunch of knives for him in the past, you know, and each one's better than the previous one. And I love seeing how that reflects just in how he looks at it. Because I don't get to be there for a lot of my customers, opening the box, and taking a look at that knife, and I don't get to see that, right? But I do with my dad. And he's the most honest person in my life. And he'll let me know right away what he thinks. And I don't have a relationship with anyone else quite like him. I'd say the biggest takeaway from being a blacksmith, and specifically being a bladesmith, is that there's pleasure and pain. And that moment where you get burned because you're not paying enough attention, or that spark lands in your shoe at the right spot and you do that hot dance, right? That bit of pain turns into pleasure because it brings you into the moment. It takes you back to what you're working on, what you're really doing. You're moving steel. You're actually moving the hardest thing, and you're moving it just with your hands. That's my takeaway, is that sometimes a little pain can teach you something truly beneficial. It can take you and bring you right back in the moment. Oh man, there's a lot of blacksmithing puns. Let's see. I think a lot of people know the too many irons in the fire. Or maybe you haven't had, quite literally you have too much iron in the fire and you can't balance the multiple projects you're working on. Infine fettle, which is more of a jewelry. Let's see. Oh, strike it while it's hot. Strike while it's hot. Strike while the iron's hot. Strike while the iron's hot. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.